Captain Jake Morrison sat in his command chair on the bridge of the USS Denver. The ship was old, very old. Paint peeled from the walls, and the lights flickered when the engines worked too hard. The Denver was 40 years old and should have been scrapped long ago. But the Navy kept her running because they needed every ship they could get. Morrison looked around his bridge. His crew was not the best the Navy had to offer. Lieutenant Amy Foster sat at the weapons station. She was 22 years old and had just finished training school 6 months ago. She was smart, but had no real fighting experience. Chief Engineer Bob Turner was 63 and should have retired years ago, but he refused to leave. He knew the old ships better than anyone else alive. At the communications station sat Lieutenant Lisa Park. She had failed advanced tactical training twice, but could make their old equipment work when nobody else could. The rest of the crew were either too young, too old, or had failed somewhere else in the Navy. The 3rd Reserve Fleet was where the Navy put ships and people they did not want, but could not throw away. 12 old ships with crews that the main fleet did not want. Morrison commanded them all, and he was proud of his people even if nobody else was. The emergency signal came through their communication system with loud static and crackling sounds. The image on the main screen showed a tall alien with crystal-like skin and 4 arms. Its eyes changed colors as it spoke, shifting from blue to purple to red. "I am Ambassador Kethvar of the Zephyrian Confederation," the alien said. Its voice sounded like music with many tones at once. "We come to the great human military asking for help. The Devourers have broken through our defenses. 17 of our worlds have gone silent. Our strongest fleets cannot stop them." Morrison looked at his crew. Foster stared at the screen with wide eyes. Turner just shook his head and muttered something under his breath. Park was trying to clean up the signal quality. "Ambassador," Morrison said carefully, "I appreciate you coming to us. But I should tell you something. This is not our main fleet. We are what you might call the reserve ships." The alien's eyes turned yellow, which Morrison's computer said meant confusion. "Reserve ships? But any human vessel should be enough. Your people are known for fighting across 7 star systems. Everyone has heard of human warriors." Morrison almost laughed. The USS Denver's main gun was held together with spare parts and prayer. Their faster-than-light drive needed to be hit with a hammer every few jumps to keep working. Half his crew had never been in a real fight. "How many ships can you send?" Kethvar asked, leaning forward. Morrison checked his display screen. The 3rd Reserve Fleet had 12 ships, all as old and broken as the Denver. "12 ships, sir. That is all we have ready to go right now." The alien's face somehow showed disappointment, but desperation won out. 12 human ships. It will have to be enough. Please, Captain Morrison, we will send you the location. Our remaining forces will meet you at the Keltor system. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge quiet except for the hum of old machinery. 12 rust buckets against an alien invasion, Turner said with a low whistle. "This should be fun." Morrison stood up and straightened his uniform jacket. The jacket was as old as the ship and had seen better days. "Helm, set course for the Keltor. System, send a message to the rest of the fleet. Tell them we have work to do." What Morrison did not know was that the Zephyrian Confederation had spent weeks building up courage to contact humanity. They had heard stories about human tactics and how humans could win fights they should lose. They expected huge warships with experienced crews. Instead, they were getting exactly what they asked for. They asked for humans, and humans were what they would get. The Devourers were about to learn why humans had a reputation for war that reached across 7 star systems. The problem was that the Devourers did not know what they were about to face either. Morrison walked to the front window of the bridge and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, an alien invasion force was destroying worlds. They had defeated fleets much stronger than his 12 old ships. But Morrison had learned something in his 20 years in the Navy. It was not always the strongest who won. Sometimes it was the ones who refused to give up. "Foster," he called to his weapons officer. "Start checking our ammunition. Turner, I want a full report on all ship systems. Park, get me communication with all fleet captains." "What are you planning, sir?" Foster asked. Morrison smiled, and it was not a nice smile. "I am planning to show these devourers why humans are still alive, after thousands of years of fighting impossible battles." The USS Denver and her 11 sister ships began their journey to the Keltor system. They were old ships with old crews, led by officers the main fleet did not want. But they were human, and that was going to have to be enough. In the depths of space, the Devourer fleet continued its advance toward the heart of Zephyrian space. They had crushed 17 worlds and destroyed fleets of advanced warships. They moved with the confidence of predators who had never met anything that could seriously threaten them. They were about to learn that confidence could be a dangerous thing. The 3rd Reserve Fleet jumped to faster-than-light speed, carrying their crews toward a battle that would change everything. Morrison sat in his command chair and watched the stars stretch into lines as they entered hyperspace. He did not know if they could win. He did not even know if they could survive. But he knew one thing for certain. They were going to try. The Keltor system looked like a graveyard when the 3rd Reserve Fleet arrived. Pieces of destroyed alien ships floated everywhere, spinning slowly in the darkness of space. The metal twisted into strange shapes, and some pieces still glowed, with fires that would burn until all the oxygen was gone. Morrison stared at the destruction through the main window of the USS Denver. He had seen battle damage before, but this was different. This was total destruction. The Zephyrian ships had been ripped apart like paper toys. "My God," whispered Foster from her weapons station. "How many ships were destroyed here?" "Looks like an entire fleet," Turner said over the communication system from the engine room. "Maybe more than one." The 12 human ships looked tiny compared to the wreckage around them. The USS Denver led the way, followed by ships with names like Hartford, Memphis, and Phoenix. All were old frigates and destroyers that the main fleet had replaced years ago. Their paint was faded, their weapons were outdated, and their crews were made up of rookies and people who had failed somewhere else. The surviving Zephyrian ships that met them were in bad shape. Where once there had been proud warships, now only damaged cruisers and desperate transport ships remained. Ambassador Kethvar's command ship, the Harmony of Stars, had black burn marks along its crystal hull and patches that glowed different colors than the rest of the ship. "Captain Morrison?" Kethvar's voice carried exhaustion and disappointment that he could not hide. "These are all the ships Earth could spare?" Commander Sarah Bell, Morrison's second-in-command, leaned forward from her station. She was one of the people the main fleet had rejected. She was a brilliant tactical officer, but she asked too many questions and argued with orders too often. "With respect, Ambassador, you asked for help. You did not ask for a specific number of ships." Morrison nodded. "What can you tell us about these devourers? How do they fight? What kind of technology do they use?" The alien's eyes shifted through many colors: fear, anger, despair. "They are unlike anything we have ever fought. Their ships seem to be alive, made of biological material. They can heal damage quickly. They do not talk to us or try to negotiate. They just consume everything: worlds, ships, entire star systems. They take all the resources and move on to the next target." Lieutenant Foster spoke up from the weapons station. Her young voice cut through the heavy mood on the bridge. "Sir, if their ships are biological, they might be weak against different types of attacks than normal ships." Chief Turner's rough voice came through the communication system. "The kid has a point. Living ships might not handle electromagnetic attacks the same way metal ships do." Kethvar's eyes shifted to blue, which meant hope according to the translation computer. "You think you can damage them?" "Ambassador," Morrison said, standing and walking closer to the main screen. "Let me tell you something about humans. We have been fighting impossible battles since we lived in caves. We have faced enemies with better weapons, more ships, and advantages we could not even understand. And we are still here." He pointed to his crew. "These are not our best ships, and we are not the main fleet." But Lieutenant Foster graduated at the top of her class in alien biology before she switched to weapons training. Chief Turner has been fixing impossible problems for 40 years. Commander Bell has studied every military battle in recorded history and can find patterns that others miss. Morrison's voice grew stronger as he spoke. "You did not just ask for our strongest ships, Ambassador. You asked for humans, and that is exactly what you got." The alien seemed to think about this, his crystal features reflecting the bridge lights in complex patterns. "The Devourer fleet will arrive in 18 hours. Our intelligence says at least 50 ships, each one larger than our biggest cruisers." 50. Against 12, Commander Bell said thoughtfully. "I have seen worse odds than that." "When?" Morrison asked. "Last Tuesday, playing poker with the engineering crew. Despite everything, that made the bridge crew laugh. Even Kethvar's eyes shifted to a lighter color, which seemed like confused but pleasant surprise. "All right, people," Morrison said, returning to his captain's chair. "We have 18 hours to figure out how to defeat a biological fleet that has conquered 17 worlds. Foster, I want you working with their science teams to find weaknesses in bioships. Turner, see what changes we can make to our weapons. Bell, start looking at their attack patterns from previous battles." "What? About me, sir?" asked Communications Officer Park. Morrison smiled, but it was not a happy smile. "Start sending messages home. If we are going to die here, we are going to die fighting. And I want everyone to know that the 3rd Reserve Fleet did not run away from a fight." As the crew went to work, Morrison felt like they were missing something important. The Devourers had conquered world after world and defeated fleets much more advanced than anything humanity had. Yet here they were, 12 old ships with crews of misfits, preparing to fight an enemy that had brought an entire alien confederation to its knees. But then again, he thought, humanity had always been good at doing impossible things. Over the next several hours, the USS Denver became a center of frantic activity. Scientists from both human and alien ships worked together, sharing data and theories. Engineers crawled through access tunnels, making modifications that would probably violate every safety regulation in the book. Foster worked with Dr. Lethmore, the chief Zephyrian scientist, studying the biological makeup of the Devourer ships. They found that the enemy vessels had cellular structures similar to deep space organisms that humans had encountered near the outer colonies. "They probably get energy through photosynthesis or chemical processes," Foster explained to Morrison. "That means they might be vulnerable to certain chemical compounds." Turner had been going through their supply lists and found something interesting. "Captain, we have got cleaning supplies and industrial chemicals that might work. These compounds could disrupt their cellular structure, at least temporarily." Commander Bell had spent her time analyzing battle recordings from previous Devourer attacks. "They fight like pack hunters," she told Morrison. "They swarm their targets using numbers and the ability to heal damage. Classic predator behavior. They are not used to prey that fights back effectively." As the hours passed, Morrison began to see a pattern. The Devourers fought like animals, not like a military force. They had instincts instead of tactics, and that might be their weakness. "Ambassador," Morrison said during one of their planning sessions, "in all these battles, did any of your ships try to retreat and come back?" Kethvar's eyes turned dark blue, which meant shame. "Retreat is not honorable in our culture. We fight until we win or die." "That is your problem," Morrison said, snapping his fingers. "They are predators. They expect prey to either run away or fight normally and lose. But what if we do something they do not expect? Like what?" Dr. Lethmore asked. Morrison grinned, and several of his crew recognized the expression. It was the same look he got when he figured out how to beat the impossible training scenarios back at the academy. We run away. Then we come back. Then we run away again. The room fell silent. Finally, Kethvar spoke. I do not understand. Hit and run tactics, Foster said, her eyes lighting up with understanding. Like pack hunting, but backwards. Exactly, Morrison said. They are biological, which means they probably think like animals. Predators do not waste energy chasing prey that is too much trouble to catch. We make ourselves too much trouble. The final hours before the battle were filled with preparation that would have terrified safety inspectors. Engines were modified to run far beyond their design limits. Chemical compounds were loaded into torpedo tubes. Shield generators were rewired to create electromagnetic interference that might disrupt biological nervous systems. As the countdown entered its final minutes, Morrison stood on the bridge of the USS Denver, looking out at his small fleet. 12 ancient ships, crewed by humans who had been told they were not good enough for the real Navy. Behind them, the surviving Zephyrian ships waited with what could only be called desperate hope. The long-range sensors began showing contacts. At the edge of the star system, 50 massive bioships, dark shapes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, moved in perfect formation toward them. The Devourers had arrived, and the real test was about to begin. The Devourer fleet came out of hyperspace like a living nightmare. 50 massive bioships moved through space with a grace that normal ships could never match. They looked like giant sea creatures crossed with warships, all curves and flowing, lines that pulsed with strange lights. Each ship was bigger than anything in Morrison's fleet, and the largest one was 3 times the size of all 12 human ships combined. Morrison watched the enemy approach on his tactical display. The lead ship looked like a massive jellyfish crossed with a manta ray, with long tentacles that moved through space as if they were swimming through water. Smaller ships, though still larger than human destroyers, moved around it in a formation that spoke of intelligence and coordination. All ships, execute attack pattern Alpha, Morrison commanded into his communication system. Let us see how they react to confused prey. The human fleet scattered in what looked like random directions. Each ship accelerated on a different course, moving away from the enemy formation. To any normal military observer, it would look like panic. To the Devourers, it probably looked like normal prey behavior. That assumption lasted exactly 47 seconds. The USS Memphis, commanded by Captain Lucy Grant, completed what appeared to be a panicked turn and suddenly fired all its weapons at the nearest bioship. The torpedoes, loaded with Turner's chemical mixture, hit the organic hull and immediately began causing visible damage. Sections of the ship's surface bubbled and twisted as if in pain. The bioship's response was fast and violent. Energy beams that looked more like living lightning than normal weapons shot out. But the Memphis was already moving away, its modified engines pushing it faster than the ship was designed to go. Direct hit on Target 7, Foster reported from her weapon station. The bioship is showing signs of cellular damage, but it is already starting to adapt and heal. Execute attack pattern Bravo, Morrison commanded. Bell, is that the leader? Commander Bell studied the enemy formation on her tactical screen. Negative, sir. The leader is staying back, letting the pack test us. Classic predator behavior. Let the others take the risks first. The next phase of their plan began. The USS Hartford and USS Phoenix came in from opposite sides, both ships targeting the same bioship that Memphis had damaged. The creature writhed under the combined attack, its glowing patterns shifting to angry reds and purples. But even as it took damage, the bioship was healing itself. The chemical weapons that had been devastating effective just minutes ago were now having less impact. Foster's prediction of a 10-minute window was proving to be too optimistic. All ships, switch to attack pattern Charlie, Morrison ordered. Time to get really annoying. Attack pattern Charlie was Morrison's own invention, something he had developed during war games at the Academy. It had earned him several official reprimands for failure to follow standard tactical doctrine. It involved calculated retreats, fake attacks, and strikes from unexpected angles. Everything that military textbooks said not to do. The bioships pursued the human vessels, but their perfect formation began to stretch as individual ships chased different targets. The coordination they had shown began to break down as their pack instincts clashed with prey that refused to behave properly. "Captain," Park called from communications, "I am getting strange readings from the lead ship. It is broadcasting on multiple frequencies, but not at us." "It is coordinating the pack," Bell realized. "Morrison, if we can disrupt those signals—" "Turner," Morrison called into his communication system, "can you modify our communications array to generate interference?" The old engineer's voice crackled. "Back. Give me 3 minutes and I will jam every frequency from here to the center of the galaxy." Those 3 minutes felt like hours. The USS Denver dodged energy beams that left glowing trails in space, while around them the rest of the fleet continued their deadly dance. The USS Boston, commanded by Captain Pete Walsh, had taken damage to its engines but kept fighting, using its wounded condition to lure bioships into range of its still-working weapons. The USS Phoenix was not so lucky. Captain Maria Santos's ship took a direct hit from one of the massive bioships, and Morrison watched in horror as sections of her hull began to dissolve under what looked like acid bombardment. "Phoenix is venting atmosphere," Foster reported, her voice tight with emotion. They are still moving. Santos is using her ship as a missile." The Phoenix, its hull half dissolved but its engines still working, accelerated directly toward the bioship that had damaged it. The organic vessel tried to move aside, but Captain Santos had predicted its movement. The collision was spectacular and devastating to both ships. "Got it," Turner's voice announced triumphantly. "Interference is active. Let us see how they like static in their communications." The effect on the Devourer formation was immediate and dramatic. The coordinated movements became erratic. Individual bioships suddenly moved independently, some even firing on each other in confusion. The leadership's glowing patterns shifted rapidly through colors that Morrison's computer could not translate. "Now!" Morrison commanded. "All ships, target the leader. Attack pattern Delta." Attack pattern Delta was simple. Every ship that could still fight converged on the massive lead bioship. The creature was 3 times their size and covered with weapons, but it was also confused and separated from its pack. The USS Denver led the charge, its ancient weapons pouring everything they had into the leader's organic hull. Around them, the remaining ships of the 3rd Reserve Fleet added their firepower to the assault. The Memphis, Hartford, Boston, Dallas, and 6 others all focused their attacks on the same target. The leadership writhed in space, its tentacles lashing out in pain and fury. Energy beams swept across the human formation, and Morrison felt his ship shake under the impact. Sparks flew from control panels and the lights flickered dangerously. "Hull breach on Deck 4, Turner's voice reported. "But we are still in the fight, Captain." The leader's glowing patterns began to fade as the creature's movements became sluggish. Around them, the rest of the Devourer fleet seemed to pause, as if unsure what to do without their leader's guidance. "It is working," Foster said with excitement. "The pack is losing coordination, but the leader was not dead yet." With a burst of energy that lit up half the star system, the massive bioship began to heal itself, its damaged sections regenerating at visible speed. Worse, its distress calls seemed to be rallying the scattered pack members back into formation. Morrison looked at his tactical display and made a decision that would either save them all or kill them all. "All ships ramming speed," he commanded. "Target the leader's central mass." "Sir?" Foster asked, her voice small and uncertain. "We are not going to outshoot this thing," Morrison explained, his hands steady on his chair's armrests even as his ship shook under enemy fire. "But we might be able to outstubborn it." The bridge crew looked at him with a mixture of fear and determination. They all knew what ramming speed meant. They all knew the odds of surviving a collision with something that massive. But they also knew their captain, and they trusted him. "Ramming speed it is," Foster said, her voice steady now. "All weapons firing." The USS Denver turned toward the massive leader ship and accelerated. Behind them, the surviving vessels of the 3rd Reserve Fleet followed their flagship into what might be their final battle. Morrison stood from his command chair and gripped the railing as his ship picked up speed. This was it. This was the moment when humanity's weakest fleet would either prove itself or die trying. The massive bioship filled their view screen, a writhing mass of organic architecture that seemed to pulse with malevolent life. Energy beams lanced out, striking their shields and causing system failures throughout the ship. 30 seconds to impact, Foster reported. Morrison looked around his bridge one last time, at Foster, young and brave beyond her years. At Belle, brilliant and determined. At Park, who had never given up despite being told she was not good enough. At Turner, somewhere in the engine room, keeping their old ship together through pure stubbornness. These were his people, the Navy's rejects and misfits. And they were about to show the galaxy what humans could do when their backs were against the wall. 10 seconds, Foster announced. Morrison smiled grimly and prepared for impact. The USS Denver hit the massive leader bioship with the force of a meteor. The impact sent shockwaves through both vessels, but instead of the expected explosion, something else happened. Turner's modified chemical weapons, concentrated and delivered directly into the creature's core, began a chain reaction that spread throughout its biological systems. Morrison pulled himself up from the floor where the impact had thrown him. His ship groaned and creaked around him, but somehow they were still in one piece. The bridge lights flickered and sparks flew from damaged control panels, but they were alive. "Damage report," Morrison called out, spitting blood from where he had bitten his tongue. "Hull breaches on 6 decks, engines at 30% power, weapons offline," Foster reported, pulling herself back into her seat. "But we are still here, sir." Through the main view screen, Morrison could see the leader bioship. The massive creature was convulsing, its bioluminescent patterns flickering and dying section by section. Turner's chemical cocktail was breaking down its cellular structure from the inside out. "All ships, report status," Morrison commanded into his communication system. The responses came in slowly. The Memphis, badly damaged but still operational. The Boston, listing to one side but intact. The Dallas, with half its weapons destroyed, but engines still working. Of the 12 ships that had entered the battle, 7 remained functional. But they had paid a price. The Phoenix was gone, Captain Santos and her crew dead heroes who had sacrificed themselves ramming an enemy vessel. The Hartford had been crushed by the leader's death throes, its hull crumpled like paper. Good people were dead, friends and colleagues who had died fighting an impossible battle with obsolete equipment. "Captain Morrison," Kethvar's voice came. Through the communication system, his musical tones harmonizing with something Morrison's computer translated as pure amazement. "The remaining Devourer vessels are retreating. They are actually fleeing the battlefield." Morrison looked at his tactical display. The bioships that had conquered 17 worlds were indeed withdrawing. Their formation was scattered, their movements erratic and uncoordinated. Without their leader, they had lost not just coordination, but the predatory confidence that had made them so dangerous. The leadership gave one final convulsion and went completely dark. Its massive form began to drift through space, lifeless and still. The effect on the remaining Devourer fleet was immediate. Some of the bioships began attacking each other, their pack instincts turning them against their own kind. Others simply fled, following some deeper biological command to escape when the pack structure collapsed. "Foster," Morrison said, settling. back into his captain's chair. "What is the status of the enemy fleet?" 60% have fled the system, sir. The remaining ships are either fighting each other or drifting without power. Whatever you did to their leader, it broke their entire command structure." Morrison nodded slowly. He was beginning to understand what had happened. The Devourers were not just a military force. They were a biological hierarchy, completely dependent on their leader organisms for coordination and decision-making. By destroying the pack leaders, the humans had effectively crippled the entire invasion force. Over the next several hours, as damage control teams worked to patch their wounded ships, the full scope of their victory became clear. The Devourer fleet that had seemed unstoppable was now broken and scattered. Some ships had fled to unknown destinations. Others drifted powerless through space. A few continued to fight each other in confused battles that served no purpose. "We never considered this approach," Dr. Lethmore admitted during a conference call with the surviving ships. His crystalline features reflected the lights in complex patterns. "Our military doctrine focuses on honor, on meeting our enemies in fair combat." "Fair combat is for sports," Commander Bell replied, her tactical mind already analyzing what they had learned. "In war, you use every advantage you can find." Morrison nodded agreement. "The Devourers expected you to fight like civilized species. With honor, with conventional tactics, with predictable strategies. They never encountered anything like human warfare." "Because humans are not civilized?" Kethvar asked, his eyes shifting to curious blue. Turner's voice came through the communication system from the engine room, where he was still working to repair their damaged systems. "Son, we are plenty civilized. We just choose not to be when someone threatens our friends." Morrison stood and walked to the viewport, looking out at the debris field that marked their victory. Pieces of bioships floated among the wreckage of Zephyrian vessels, a monument to a battle that should have been impossible to win. "Ambassador," Morrison said, "the Devourers will be back eventually. They will adapt, learn from this encounter, develop new strategies, but now you know how to fight them." "How?" Kethvar asked. "Like humans," Morrison replied simply. "Hit-and-run tactics, unconventional warfare, chemical weapons, ramming attacks, psychological warfare. Everything your military manuals probably tell you not to do." Foster looked up from her data console, where she had been analyzing the battle's aftermath. "Sir, I have been thinking about something. The Devourers conquered 17 worlds and defeated fleets far more advanced than ours, but they were stopped by 12 obsolete human ships. What is your point, Lieutenant? What happens when they encounter our main fleet?" Morrison considered this question, a slow smile spreading across his face. The Third Reserve Fleet had been humanity's weakest military force, crewed by rookies and people who had failed elsewhere, equipped with outdated vessels and weapons held together with spare parts and determination, and they had just proven that humanity's weakest was more than enough to handle a threat that had brought an entire galactic confederation to its knees. "I think," Morrison said finally, "the galaxy is about to learn why humans have a reputation for being completely unreasonable." In the days that followed, news of the battle began to spread throughout known space. The story grew in the telling. 12 human ships defeating a fleet that had conquered worlds. Humanity's rejects proving themselves against impossible odds. The species that fought dirty and won anyway. The Zephyrian Confederation immediately began restructuring their military doctrine, incorporating human concepts like strategic withdrawal and tactical dishonor. Other alien species started requesting human military advisors, wanting to learn the tactics that had broken the Devourer advance. And somewhere in the depths of space, the surviving Devourer bioships carried news of their defeat back to their home territories. They would spread word of a new species that refused to follow the rules of civilized warfare, a species that turned their weaknesses into strengths and their failures into victories. Morrison walked through the damaged corridors of his ship, checking on his crew and assessing the repairs they would need. They had won, but the cost had been high. Good people were dead, and their ships were barely holding together. But they had won. Against impossible odds, with obsolete equipment and a crew of misfits, they had defeated an enemy that had terrorized the galaxy. "Captain," Foster said, catching up to him in the corridor outside the engine room, "I have been running some calculations. Based on what we learned about devourer biology and pack behavior, I think we could develop specific weapons designed to target their command structures." Morrison nodded. "Write up a full report. Send copies to Fleet Command and to our Zephyrian allies. This information could save a lot of lives." "Yes, sir. And Captain? I just wanted to say, I am proud to serve under you. We all are." Morrison smiled and put a hand on the young officer's shoulder. "Foster, you and the rest of this crew just proved something important. You proved that being humanity's weakest does not mean being weak. It just means we have room to grow." As the 3rd Reserve Fleet began its journey home, Morrison sat in his command chair and looked out at the stars. They were returning as heroes, their crews decorated and their story already becoming legend throughout human space. But Morrison knew the truth that his crew understood. They had not won because they were the best humanity had to offer. They had won because they were human, and humans simply refused to give up, no matter how impossible the odds. Even humanity's weakest was strong enough to change the galaxy, and the galaxy would never be the same. 3 months after the Battle of Keltor, Captain Jake Morrison stood on the observation deck of the USS Denver, watching the construction crews work on his ship. The old frigate was docked at Zephyrian Shipyard Station, undergoing repairs that would have been impossible at any human facility. The aliens had insisted on fixing the ships that had saved their worlds, using their advanced technology to restore the battered vessels. The Denver looked almost new again. Her hull gleamed with fresh plating that was stronger than the original materials. Her weapons had been upgraded with hybrid human Zephyrian technology that combined the best of both civilizations. But Morrison had insisted they keep the ship's original character. She was still the USS Denver, still an old frigate with a crew of misfits, just a little better equipped now, Captain, Lieutenant Foster said, approaching from behind. She wore new insignia on her uniform. She had been promoted to lieutenant commander and given command of her own ship, the USS Phoenix the Sioux, named in honor of Captain Santos and her crew. "The ceremony is about to begin." Morrison nodded and followed her toward the main assembly hall. The Zephyrian Confederation was holding a celebration to honor the human crews who had broken the Devourer invasion. Representatives from dozens of alien species had come to meet the warriors who had accomplished the impossible. The assembly hall was filled with beings from across the galaxy. Crystalline Zephyrians stood next to gas-breathing Vorthen diplomats. Silicon-based Terrak merchants chatted with energy beings whose names Morrison could not pronounce. All had come to see the humans who had changed everything. Ambassador Keth Var stood at the center of the hall, his eyes shifting through colors that indicated joy and gratitude. "Friends and allies," he began, his musical voice carrying to every corner of the room. "We gather today to honor the warriors who saved our worlds when all seemed lost." Morrison and his surviving crew members stood at attention as Keth Var continued his speech. "The 3rd Reserve Fleet of the human Navy came to us in our darkest hour. 12 ships crewed by those their own military considered expendable. Yet, these warriors achieved what our greatest fleets could not." The ambassador gestured toward the humans. "They showed us that victory does not always go to the strongest or the best equipped. Sometimes it goes to those who refuse to surrender, who find ways to turn weakness into strength, who fight with such determination that even the laws of nature bend before their will." Morrison felt uncomfortable with all the praise. They had done their job, nothing more. But he understood that to these aliens, what they had done seemed miraculous. The Devourers had been unstoppable until they met human stubbornness. After the ceremony, Morrison found himself surrounded by alien diplomats and military officers, all asking questions about human tactics and strategy. A Terrac general wanted to know how humans had developed their unconventional warfare methods. A Vorthon admiral asked about the psychological principles behind hit-and-run tactics. "It is not complicated," Morrison explained to a group of mixed species. "Humans have always been weak compared to the predators on our world. We survived by being clever, by working together, and by never giving up. When we reached the stars, we brought those same qualities with us." "But how do you teach such thinking?" asked a crystalline officer whose species had joined the war against the Devourers. "Our military academies focus on honor and proper tactics." Commander Bell, who had been promoted to captain and given command of the new USS Hartford, stepped forward. "You cannot teach it in a classroom. You learn it by facing impossible situations and finding ways to survive. Humans have been doing that for thousands of years." The conversations continued late into the night. Morrison shared stories of human military history, explaining how seemingly weak forces had defeated stronger enemies throughout their species' development. The aliens listened with fascination to tales of guerrilla warfare, of desperate last stands, of victories achieved through sheer refusal to accept defeat. Dr. Lethmore approached Morrison during a quiet moment. "Captain, I have been studying the battle data from Keltor. What you accomplished should have been mathematically impossible." Morrison smiled. "Doctor, humans have been doing mathematically impossible things since we learned to count. It is what we do." "But how?" the alien scientist pressed. "Your ships were inferior. Your weapons were outdated. Your crews were inexperienced. By every logical measure, you should have been destroyed within minutes." Morrison thought about the question seriously. "Because we did not fight by logical measures. We fought like humans. We used every advantage we could find, ignored every rule that did not help us win, and refused to accept that losing was even possible." He gestured toward his crew, scattered throughout the hall and talking with various alien officials. "Turner kept our engines running through pure stubbornness. Foster found ways to hurt enemies she had never seen before. Bell saw patterns that no computer would have recognized. Park made our old equipment perform miracles." Morrison's voice grew stronger as he spoke. "We won because we were human, not because we were the best humans, but because we were human at all." That was enough. News of the victory had reached Earth weeks ago, and the response had been immediate. The Third Reserve Fleet was no longer considered expendable. Morrison and his officers had been promoted and given their choice of assignments. The ships themselves had been designated as special vessels, too historically important to be scrapped. But more importantly, the battle had changed how the galaxy viewed humanity. Before Keltor, humans were seen as a young, aggressive species with some talent for warfare. After Keltor, they were recognized as something far more dangerous, a species that could not be defeated by conventional means. "Captain Morrison," Kethvar approached as the celebration began to wind down. "I have news from the front lines. 3 more Devourer fleets have been encountered by various species using the tactics you taught us. All 3 were defeated with minimal losses." Morrison nodded with satisfaction. "And the Devourers? They appear to be withdrawing from this region of space entirely. Our intelligence suggests they are seeking easier prey elsewhere, worlds without human military advisors." "Good," Morrison said. "Maybe now the galaxy can have some peace." Kethvar's eyes shifted to a color that indicated deep respect. "Captain, there is something else. My government has asked me to extend an offer. We would like to establish a permanent and military alliance with humanity. Your species has much to teach us about survival." Morrison considered this. An alliance between humanity and the Zephyrian Confederation would change the balance of power in this region of space. It would also mean that human military doctrine, would spread even further among the alien civilizations. "I will pass your offer along to my superiors," Morrison said, "but I think they will be interested. Humans like making friends, especially friends who appreciate our particular talents." As the celebration finally ended, Morrison walked back to his ship with his crew. The USS Denver sat in her repair dock, looking better than she had in decades, but still recognizably the same old frigate that had carried them to victory. "So what now, Captain?" Foster asked as they approached the airlock. Morrison looked up, at his ship, then at the stars visible through the station's viewports. Somewhere out there, the Devourer fleets were retreating, carrying word of their defeat back to whatever dark corner of space they came from. Other alien species were learning human tactics, preparing to defend themselves against threats they could not have faced before. "Now we go home," Morrison said. "We have earned some leave time, and I hear they are planning a parade on Earth." "A parade for the 3rd Reserve Fleet?" Turner asked with a chuckle. "The Navy's rejects and misfits?" Morrison smiled as they entered their ship. "Turner, we are not rejects anymore. We are the fleet that saved 17 worlds and changed the galaxy. I think that deserves a parade." As the USS Denver prepared to depart for Earth, Morrison sat in his captain's chair one last time before they entered hyperspace. His crew worked around him with the efficiency born of shared hardship and victory. They had proven themselves in the crucible of impossible battle. But more than that, they had proven something about humanity itself. They had shown that even their weakest representatives could stand against the darkness and win. Not through superior technology or overwhelming force, but through the simple human refusal to give up. The stars stretched into lines as they entered hyperspace, carrying the 3rd Reserve Fleet home. Behind them, they left a galaxy that would never again underestimate the species that fought dirty, thought creatively, and never knew when to quit. Morrison closed his eyes and smiled. They had done something that would be remembered for generations. 12 obsolete ships with crews of misfits had defeated an invasion force that had conquered worlds. It was, he thought, a very human thing to do. The USS Denver and her sister. Ships jumped to faster-than-light speed, heading home to a hero's welcome. They carried with them the knowledge that humanity's reputation in the galaxy had been forever changed. They were no longer just another young species with some talent for violence. They were the species that could not be beaten, no matter what. The odds, and that, Morrison knew, was exactly the reputation humans deserved.